Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. Are you getting swept up in the wave of returns? The ever-increasing volume of returns has been made easy on the consumer side, but when it comes to the operation side, it is quite the challenge. Originally live on LinkedIn for our new weekly live audio series, this conversation was sponsored by Two Boxes, and I was joined by Evan Stalter of Two Boxes, Courtney Folk of Renewal Logistics, and Austin Kreinz of Atomix. We dive into what the current state of returns looks like, how operations are dealing with these problems, and how consumer behavior can change depending on your returns policy. Here's the conversation.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Courtney, Evan, Austin, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. So I think we want to kind of set a little baseline here, foundation for the conversation, and kind of get perspective, I think, around the table, I guess this virtual table, we'll call it, how you guys would kind of define the current state of returns. So why don't we start with Courtney? How would you define the current state of returns right now?
Oh man, that's a really great question. So, you and I were talking about this recently when I was on your New Warehouse podcast, and I think
coming soon.
Oh yeah, good. So I think what I see that's a little different than before is that people are becoming, since they're, cash strapped a little bit because of the inflation, people are settling into the fact that prices are just going to be more than they were. So they're being a lot more careful about what they purchase. And they're also, though, if they purchase something and it's not the perfect fit, they're a lot more happy and proactive about returning it. And so I think there is, a mindset shift where in the past you would just kind of let things sit. Now things are actually, people are being proactive. So I think that's one piece on the consumer side that I've seen a lot. And then on the brand side, I'm definitely seeing a lot more proactivity to try to limit returns. And I've seen a lot of brands kind of decrease their return policies, make them a little less favorable, and, gathering a lot more data about why something is being returned. So I just think, efficiency on all sides is really kind of driving that. But those are the two main things I see from a high level.
Very interesting. Yeah. I think that's interesting because certainly the consumer being more conscious and maybe more attuned to actually making those returns is certainly going to increase the volume on the operations side as well. So, Austin, why don't you tell us kind of from your perspective, what are you seeing right now?
Yeah, I think really just in the moment of where we are now, anyone around the industry, this is kind of our peak for returns. So in January, post-holidays, we'll see the increase. I think when it comes to consumer behavior and what we see, mainly from what our brands and their end customers are doing, we kind of see a mixed bag, and whether we want to call it testing or not, but how with kind of Amazon's impact of making returns and having free returns so easy, it's being careful with how do you make returns a little harder, but then how does that impact the customer experience? I think from my point of view, I wouldn't push too far of making it too hard to make returns. I have some anecdotes and stories of that leaving kind of a bad taste in the end customer's mouth for that brand in particular. It's really, I mean, our biggest piece of looking at returns, I mean, as it continues to increase as we scale, like we're really looking at identifying ways that we can streamline processes on our end from a 3PL's point of view. And we'll get into that later about how Two Boxes is really honestly changed the game for us. And we've been pumped over the past few months of working with them. And I'll kind of just leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely dive into Two Boxes a little later too, as well, as you mentioned. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to see kind of the shift, and you mentioned Amazon in there, and obviously Amazon has kind of, pushed a lot of people in different ways in terms of expectations across the board from a shipping perspective, returns perspective, all around. So interesting to hear from Courtney and Austin on the operations side of what kind of they're seeing. I'm curious, Evan, what you're seeing in the state of returns. Obviously, you guys are focused on solving some of the returns problems and challenges for operators and those who are processing the returns, but you guys are talking to a lot of people, I'm sure, as well, who are dealing with returns. So tell us a little bit from your perspective on what you see as kind of the current state.
Yeah, so I think from a technology perspective, there's a ton of innovation happening on the front end of the returns. So the RMA providers out there like Loop Returns and Happy Returns, the Aftership, they're all innovating around the consumer experience of trying to turn a return into an exchange, or offering free returns, or making it just easier and a better customer experience. But as we all know, the back end of that process is where the challenge happens for the operators. And there hasn't been much innovation at all in the warehouse for returns processing. And that's where the big pain is. And I think if you can kind of zoom out, there's a couple of things that really, for me, define like the problem set. And it's like, there's not much visibility. So once things are dropped off, you'll have your carrier updates, but, most warehouse operators don't have line of sight to how many returns are coming back, what SKUs are coming back, when they're going to land, which of course makes it very difficult to plan for labor. There's no intelligence, once the returns show up at the dock door of like, what's the hot SKU? What do I need to process first? Everything's kind of just a mixed bag. And then, during processing, there's a whole host of challenges, which we can go into later. But, the central theme there is around data collection and, providing that visibility back to the brands as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great kind of segue into our next question here, which I definitely want to hear from Courtney and Austin here on this, which would be, from the operations perspective. You guys both operated and have built out 3PLs here and dealing with returns. I mean, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced or are facing now when it comes to returns? Maybe if you have some stories about that, it'd be great to hear that. Austin, why don't you kind of chime in here?
Yeah, so I think when we think about the biggest challenges, I bucket into three main areas. One is around processes related to having different types of brands. The second is breaking SOPs down by the types of returns, whether that's damage, back to stock, what kind of point in the process is it at. And then the third piece is around data and insight. So whenever we're looking at general process improvement, I think having a member of the team that can look at data to kind of extrapolate that and say, hey, this will be the impact of a change. I think that takes someone, whether that's from a data analyst or our finance area, to kind of help our operations team just think differently about process improvement. And really, that's when I first met the Two Box teams. I mean, maybe a year ago, thought it was super interesting because when the general kind of it's like misnomer from a 3PL's perspective is returns are like a loss leader and you just have to kind of deal with it. I think Two Boxes and us shared a kind of similar philosophy. We're like, hey, how can we have returns that a differentiator for our business model? And how can we really create both in-depth and scalable and profitable processes? So when we talk and kind of met with the Two Box team about the SOP management of how so when I talked about that first kind of issue that we think through is you have different types of brands that have different types of kind of needs of what are those 10 steps that you're going to walk through when that shipment hits our door. Well, having a software platform that you can keep all 10 of those brands and their specific processes that might be very in-depth, some might be straightforward, and just have it like an easy UI to kind of go through that. That was just a massive piece for us. And then the second piece of just what is the state of the return and what step that goes into. I think that it was a lot just easier with 2 boxes. And then lastly, on the data insight, a big thing for us is we've built out our own WMS. We were actually in the process of building out an integration to Loop, and we have a pretty lean team. So when we met the 2 box team, they're like, hey, we've built out our Loop integration. And it was just another little win for us that we're like, okay, perfect. This is a way that we can move quickly and have a really strong integration to like these modern providers.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I think obviously, there's a lot of variables when it comes to returns and what's coming in and like you said, the state of that return and how it's going to come in as well. And it makes a big difference to be able to have that proper data and be able to have real good processes in place to go through that. So, Courtney, how about on your side from the operations perspective? I mean, what are some of the challenges you see there? I mean, I know that you do returns, but then you also do a lot of refurbishment kind of things as well. So there's a lot more complexity there, I'm sure, in some cases. So tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you guys face.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. We do returns. We also do refurbishment. So we actually are kind of an apparel focused 3PL. And so we seek out customers who have high return rates. And we do that because a lot of times if you start looking at the math of, if it takes you 10 days to get goods back into stock because you have to have a refurbishment process and there's a lot of steps to it and it takes time. Especially for apparel brands where, you have special SKUs. You don't want to have like 1,000 of each SKU. You just want to have a handful of each SKU. So it feels special for a customer to buy it. And like, it's almost like a one of a kind item. A lot of times customers are going to like size bracket if they are buying online. So they're going to buy, their size plus the one that's larger and the one that's smaller. And they need a solution to be able to kind of immediately get those back into stock and then also have it be a part of their forward logistics program. So for us, providing an integrated solution for customers to where their returns are under the same roof or co-located with their forward logistics is really, really important. And that's allowed some brands to be able to grow, their sales by 25% on the same inventory that they had. So looking at how much money is tied up in that order to cash cycle based on those goods sitting can really be impactful for some brands. So for us, it's like, looking at upfront, really building out those business rules of, what is it that if it's a $10 t-shirt, you're going to treat that very differently than, a $500 ball gown. And the brand is going to be willing to spend differently on a more expensive item than something that they have a lot of and it's a low value. So for us, it's, nailing down those processes and those business rules for each brand. And then we also do a lot of like corporate returns. So like we work with super large global brands and we handle, like returns from Target or from Macy's. And that's a whole different ball game where you have, you're getting back a pallet of toilets along with all of the apparel, and it never should have even showed up at your building. You got to figure out what you're supposed to do with that stuff. And, and then there's the whole like, okay, so we have this many units that don't have barcodes. So how do we figure out what it is? And the communication between our company and the customer to be able to say, here's what we need to order in terms of new trim items for these products. Here's how many we need. And then being able to like communicate with companies like Fine Line or Avery Dennison to be able to get those trim items back in place. So there's a lot to returns, but it's really important for companies to be able to have a good solution there because it really can make such a difference since people do return so much. And usually it's not a disposable item where you would just, you open it and see if it's been opened. And if it has, it's automatically thrown away.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting, and definitely a lot of complexities there, especially those unexpected toilets that you mentioned as well. So, very interesting. I mean, I think there's so much complexity there too, and I think because we look at the consumer behavior, the consumer is not thinking about returning something and making it convenient for the warehouse that's receiving it to be able to process it. They just want to get their cash back or get their exchange, whatever their end goal is. So Evan, why don't you talk to us a little bit about kind of some of the challenges, I guess, that you guys saw as Two Boxes out there in the market, and then maybe this is a good chance for you to talk to about how Two Boxes kind of addresses some of those challenges.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, like generally returns are super hard. It's a complex and unstructured problem. And a lot of what the associates in the warehouse are doing is just problem solving. And it gets even harder when you have multi-tenant facilities where you have multiple brands with different SOPs. And on top of that, like different categories of goods. And when Kyle and I started the company, we went around to about 15, 20 different warehouses, just trying to view all of the different returns processing operations that we could. And what we saw was generally something like this, where an associate would have an admin portal from an RMA provider like Loop or Happy Returns open. They would have a Google Sheet open to track any defects that they find. If they found some defects, they would take their personal cell phone, take a picture of it, email it to their work email, plop it in the spreadsheet. They'd have their label printing software open as well, and probably a PDF or a printed version of that PDF of the brand's SOPs laying in a binder on the desk. And that's absolutely a fine way to start, but obviously it's not a great way to scale your returns processing operations. So what we did was take everything that we saw and put it into a workflow that manages the SOPs for these multi-tenant facilities. So we go through with all of our merchants, and this soon will be self-serve via our partner portal, and digitize all the SOPs so that we're putting all of these steps into a workflow so that the associates get trained on a workflow, not on a specific brand, which has a lot of implications in terms of increasing UPH, having more standard processes, and throughout the entire process, we're also collecting data. And I think the visibility for brands is one of the key things that they're looking for, right? It's a black box. It is their inventory. It's coming back, and they don't know what's going on. And there's a lot of customer experience requests. Hey, why is my refund not being issued? And a lot of brands try and solve this by issuing refunds at the front part of the process, which opens everybody up to a little bit more of a fraud, and it's not necessarily the best answer there. So like I was saying, we digitize all those SOPs, we have it in the workflow, and we provide that visibility back to the brand. And then another thing that we're doing for the operators is providing visibility to the front part of that process. So we have actually kind of two products that work in conjunction. We have a tracking dashboard, which tells the 3PL, hey, you have this many returns arriving today, this many arriving tomorrow. You have this many that are delivered and unprocessed. And then once it shows up, we have another product, which we call X-Ray, which allows you to sort through and basically prioritize returns. So more or less triage the returns that show up, so that you can process what's most important to your brands first, right? So if you have something that's seasonal and it's a hot seller, most brands want that back in stock as soon as possible. And the stuff that's kind of was bought on sale and doesn't really have that sort of same time value can be processed later, right? So like not every return is equal. So those are a couple of things that we're doing to help out the warehouse operators.
Very interesting, and definitely, I love a good SOP myself, and I love that when they can all be organized to in a great way as well. It sounds like you guys are able to do that, and much more to be able to allow those who are processing these returns to do it much more efficiently, and then also increase that overall customer experience on the back end as well, and be able to really help the brands look better too, and shine through for those customers, which I think is a great thing, because you see a lot of times, like you said, like it can take time as a consumer to see that credit come through or that refund come through, depending on the processing there, and sometimes the brand could lose money just because they don't want to lose the customer in that sense, or open themselves up to fraud, as you mentioned too, Evan, which I think is a pretty interesting point. So I mean, I guess I'll open this up to all three of you. I mean, from the brand and fulfillment partner perspective, I mean, as these returns continue to increase and volume continues to grow, I mean, how do you work with brands, or how can brands work with fulfillment partners in a better way to kind of alleviate a lot of these challenges, or try to make things easier and overall better for the consumer?
Selfish plug. I think the best thing the operator can do is use two boxes. I think, but on a more seriously, I think collaboration is always key, and having a platform and kind of a standard to collaborate around, leads to expectations not meeting reality. So SOP management, everybody being able to look at what the current SOP is, at this point in time, leads to a lot less confusion of like, hey, why did you donate this top? It should have been, put back to stock, or, put back to stock for a resale program. And, a 3PL will be able to point at the two boxes SOP and say, hey, when we set this up, we said that, a light stain that couldn't be reworked gets donated. I think then the second thing is, again, the visibility, right? Having photos of every damaged item, which is something that we enable in our process and with our software, is huge for brands, because it builds trust between the brands and the 3PLs, because they know why things are either being donated or recycled, or even, in some cases, landfilled. So just having this kind of platform to collaborate around and build trust between the two partners, I think is huge.
Yeah, very interesting point there, and I love the photo proof too as well, which I think it comes in handy a lot of times. So, what about Courtney and Austin? How do you guys work with? Because you guys work with multiple brands through 3PLs. I mean, how do you work with brands to have these better kind of returns experiences and alleviate some of the challenges we were talking about before?
Yeah, I can hop in there, and I agree a lot with Evan's sentiment. I think the core always comes down to that collaboration. In the way that I see collaboration fall under that is two pieces. One is on the data side. So that is, how do we streamline and automate this process as much as possible? And for us, that's where we look to an integration with Loop, as the majority of our customers use Loop to kind of create a better client-facing experience, which we believe in that aspect. So we said, hey, let's be integrated to that. And that's where Two Boxes had that built in-house. That's the first part. And then the second part is collaboration around those SOPs. So Evan alluded to that, of the brand asking, why did you dispose of this item? Well, we can now kind of go back into the history of our relationship and say, hey, when we set it up with a different member of your team 6 months ago, this item that falls under this criteria is disposed of. And I think when it ever comes to a partnership and relationship, it's never, hey, I want to put a blame on you or your partner or your team member. It's just, hey, let's get to the root issue here. What happened? And how do we have that very clear kind of central source of truth, of data, of information, to be able to make kind of the best decisions of either our team owning it, hey, that was a mistake, or hey, no, this is our team following the process. Should we update it? So yeah, that's how I think through our partnership. Yeah,
I think that's great, and being able to have like that collaborative aspect, like you said, and be able to, like you said there just at the end, like ask them like, well, this is why we did this because the process is this way, and should we update it at this point or do something differently? I think that's a really good takeaway there. Courtney, how about on your side?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything that has been said. And just, I think for us, a lot of this comes into the onboarding process, like really that alignment process of, and apparel is a little different than some of the, other things that we've been talking about from a standpoint of you have a lot of subjective characteristics in a garment that are going to determine whether it's first quality or second quality. And so having our inspectors really spend a lot of time with the brands to make sure that we are fully on the same page. And that might be, depending on how large the return partner is, it may be an in-person meeting to start with when we're first onboarding them, or it may be over, video calls to be able to kind of show, here are some of the things we're seeing. This to us would be considered a second quality garment. Is this considered a first quality garment to you? Because we do think it's on the line. And then on the back end, after those items have been processed, doing test cases of them to make sure that the processing is going to be satisfactory to the brand and that it's going to represent, the way that they want to put their products out. And so if something didn't turn out, there's a lot of things with manufacturing when you start doing refurbishment, especially in apparel where manufacturing processes, you're supposed to be able to rely on an item to be able to be processed 3 times and it's still brand new. And so is that actually the case? And what are we finding from a test results standpoint and handling this return? And I think that that's super critical for apparel because, you can rely on SOPs and rules a lot, but when you start having some items that were made with one dye lot and then other items that were made with a different dye lot, and you start seeing subtle changes, sometimes you do have like super focused people who are doing the inspection process to make sure that everything that you want to have refurbished actually does come back first quality. So I know this is a little different, but it's still kind of the same in terms of, you're still spending a lot of time on alignment and talking to the brands very carefully to make sure that whatever the finished product looks like is what their intent is.
Very interesting. Yeah. Interesting perspective there from the apparel side. Definitely. I'm curious, Courtney and Austin, like, are you guys seeing this year? I mean, I think Austin, you said it there. We're kind of like in the peak season for returns right now. I mean, are you guys seeing a large increase in returns from previous years, or kind of the same? What are you guys seeing on that front?
I know for us, our returns are probably going to really start hitting in another couple weeks. So the later part of January is usually really busy for us. I think a lot of our corporate clients have done, like our very large brands have done a good job of managing the expectations of their retailer partners to where they're not accepting returns back as easily as they used to. And so a big part of that is like making sure that as soon as those goods come in, that there's crediting data back very, very fast so that they can kind of have those conversations with the retailers of like, these numbers are a little off versus what you intended. And so for us, it's very busy because it was a good selling season this year, but it feels a lot more manageable. It's been more chaotic in the past. And I feel like sometimes a lot of our brands are starting to really get their arms around how to have these conversations and make the processes run smoothly.
Interesting. And what about for you, Austin? Are you guys seeing more?
Yeah, it's a good question because even if I look year over year, it's going to be skewed dramatically because as like a company, we grew 6 times from last year to this year. So,
nice.
And it's tough to normalize it, like to see what it actually was. So, Looking at like the trailing like 3 months, we actually had our returns increase a little more actually than I expected in December. I didn't get down to like which of our brands specifically. We work with brands that are doing roughly $1 million in annual revenue to 20 up to $50 million. And so maybe it was some of them that ran their sales either like before thinking that could have been increasing in December, because for like January, it's like increasing 10% over December, like so far. So maybe similarly, we'll have an increase some more at the end of January. But yeah, I don't have too much from a higher like level of what does like year over year returns. I would assume that as kind of like the retail industry at large grows, whatever percentage that is, returns would probably stay in line with that. But that's just a guess on my end.
All right. Well, interesting, and congratulations on the growth in the past year too. I mean, that's really great. So yeah, I mean, I was curious about that from a volume perspective, but I'm curious from what you think looking forward. I mean, we see, and I think it was Austin mentioned earlier in the conversation about Amazon having the free returns, but we see some brands are starting to charge again for returns, and I'm curious what kind of impact you guys think that will have. Will it reduce the number of returns? Will it reduce maybe the number of overall purchases from the beginning if people can't return for free? I'm curious what some of your thoughts might be around that. Maybe Evan, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think just to start, if we're selling things online, then there's going to be returns, and I think brands offer free returns because it drives conversion. And I think there's a really large incentive for brands to reduce friction, especially if other brands are offering free returns. And some are starting to charge, and Narvar and others have published that most consumers are willing to pay small fees, kind of up to $3. But we think that there's a large opportunity here to be more specific about which consumers to charge and how much to charge them, right? You can imagine a world where you have data on consumers and cohort level of people, and you can see the returning patterns, and not only you can see like the frequency and kind of dollar amount of how much they're returning, but also are they a good returner or not? Like, what condition are the items in when they come back to the warehouse? Everything pristine and it always goes back to stock all the time? Or do people, wardrobe their items and, buy a pair of leggings, wear them to a yoga class or two, and then decide that actually I want my money back and send back some dirty leggings? And like, for that consumer, you probably should charge them in the future. But for somebody who's new to your brand, or somebody who there's this somebody has a return credit score, so to say, and it's good, they should probably continue to get free returns. So I think kind of blanket solutions, it might help a little bit, but I think that the key here is being able to get much more specific about who gets free returns and the people who are getting charged how much.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and I like the idea of the returns kind of scorecard maybe in a couple of years, instead of seeing like TikToks and videos on how to increase your credit score. We're going to be seeing on how to increase your return score or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty interesting.
And you can also imagine brands running promotions and offers to people who they know are not only good buyers but good returners.
Interesting. I'm curious, Courtney, what are your thoughts around that? I'm sure you guys have seen some dirty leggings before that you guys have got a return on the apparel side. So how do you feel about that kind of shift a little bit?
Honestly, I love what Evan just said. I think that's like such a, so neat to think about the future, kind of having a social credit score. You've got now a return score. And I mean, like airlines do that now, if you go online and you look at a price and then you come back in an hour and you look at it again, that price keeps going up every time you go onto their site and you don't actually purchase. So I could see a very similar, thing happening there. But what I see with brands right now, kind of what I think the two places that most brands are making it a little more tricky to return, two places. First of all, like shortening the window. So, giving it a shorter window to be able to return something. And then secondly, returning for store credit rather than for your full money back. So I think that there's some subtle things that brands can do to become more assertive without necessarily like losing customer satisfaction or retention or appeal. And so I think there's a lot of like small levers like that companies can pull and that they are pulling.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that gets handled, because I know that, returns, it's just been increasing as e-commerce has been increasing as well. And, I don't necessarily do this myself, but I do see like a lot of people where, they order multiple sizes of something instead of, having the old fitting room at the retail store. They're doing it at home and then returning those things. So it's kind of almost like inevitable that somebody's going to return something. So it'd be interesting to see how some brands are kind of reacting to that. And if we get that social returns score there, as you guys were mentioning, I think that'll be pretty interesting. Austin, what do you think on your side?
Yeah, I think the two biggest factors when I think through the kind of consumer behavior is one is what we've talked a lot about is kind of the Amazon effect on expectations, and then two is it actually gets to the vertical of your brand, and what I mean by that is, for example, what you were just mentioning with apparel, as Evan mentioned, having free returns drives conversion. In apparel, it's pretty normal for first-time buyers to purchase a large and extra large, or a large, medium, extra large. And I think for brands that are in those verticals where that is a natural kind of piece to the buying process, is you really hone in on, hey, how do we streamline and make our returns process as efficient as possible? Because the reality of them charging for returns in that vertical is going to dramatically impact conversions. And again, that is just kind of my insight when I think about the apparel piece. And then the irony for what brands I believe could charge more for returns wouldn't necessarily need to charge for returns. So I think about like the brands that, if they don't want to impact conversion, well, it's going to be those brands that are most likely larger and have kind of built that kind of base where, hey, this is a product that I'm not going to an alternative. But the reality is they're probably don't have that high of a return rate. So even if they did charge for it, you wouldn't see an impact. So yeah, it's interesting. I think my better way of approaching that is, yeah, how do you use one of these tools, whether it's Loop or one of the other players, to kind of just make the experience better, where you can kind of nudge your end customers to getting credit or getting future discounts. So still making a good and streamlined experience, but just giving other avenues to have them kind of stay with your brand still. So.
All right. Very interesting insights all around, and definitely appreciate you guys joining here and talking to me all about returns as well. I think we'll kind of open it up if anybody listening wants to raise their hand, ask any questions, or give any input. Feel free to do that. I think Seth here. Let's bring him on. Hey, Seth.
Hey, Kevin. How are you?
Good. I hear you now. You're good. What's up?
So listen, first off, great presentation, guys. Thank you very much. Kevin, thank you for putting it together. Learned a lot, especially considering my role. The one comment that I would make is, and this is more of a comment, if you guys want to return comment, great, but I'll give you an example. I was talking about buying sheets, and I have a friend that suggested I buy 3 different sets to test them out, just to return them, the ones that I didn't like. I won't do that, only because it's too big of a pain in the butt for me. But I think the social score is a great idea, but I think it will dramatically change the growth trajectory of e-commerce if people are worried about challenges and costs with returns. And I think part of the extreme growth, was it was so easy, which makes sense. And it does make sense that people in your position and that retailers and everybody else is thinking about how they're going to mitigate the dramatic costs and challenges of returns. But I do believe that once the onus gets put on the consumer, it's going to change the trajectory for all of us.
Yeah, interesting insight there, and I definitely kind of see that could potentially happen too. I mean, if you look at, like you said, you don't want to do it because it's difficult for you, but returns like has been historically easy, right, for people to do, and that's kind of some of the benefit of e-commerce. There is that convenience. So, what about the panel here? What do you guys think, Evan? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think that's where having visibility into the quality of the return from, my perspective kind of is a differentiator, right? So it's not only frequency, but I think it's the NRF and a couple other people have published that, returns fraud is like, 10% of all returns are fraudulent. And returns is a multi $100 billion problem. So it kind of adds up for the merchants and brands they're basically taking the hit there, right? So I think the behavior that you would want to encourage is kind of a typical try on what you like. We'll have tools in the warehouse that will make it easier to get things back to stock and get good things and good quality back to stock. But, for the people who tend to abuse things, we're not going to not let you buy things, but next time you buy from us, we're going to charge you, $5 or $7 or $10 restocking fee, which I think a lot of people would accept. If you're a good returner, you're probably not going to get a restocking fee.
I happen to agree with you. To agree with you. And when you balance out the trajectory of growth of e-commerce versus the cost associated with it, and then back out of that to some degree, you might not have the same growth, but the costs also won't be there. Yeah. So I happen to think it will work out in the end, but just interesting to see how it's all playing out. That's all.
Great question.
Yeah, definitely.
And can I add to that, Kevin? Do you mind? I mean,
I think
so I think he brings up a great point. So like in apparel, the way that people used to buy clothing a long time ago was through catalogs, like the Sears catalog, and they would know their pattern and they would know their measurements. And so then they would be pretty much assured that whatever they purchased was going to fit because of the fact that it was, those two things were known up front. And so like, I could even see with that whole social credit score of like, okay, if you're going to give me more information and insight about why this product didn't work for you, then I'm going to give you better, more favorable return dynamics, because I think that could be extremely valuable for brands to have a really strong idea and understanding of like, because, you start thinking about customer acquisition, you get one customer, and then if they buy from you 100 times, they're going to want to buy the same things over and over again. If you find apparel that fits, you're going to want those same patterns and those similar styles. And so you could take that data that Evan is talking about and really turn that into a selling opportunity for customers as well, so that maybe there's a carrot and a stick.
Interesting point there. Yeah, definitely. And great comment by you, Seth. That's Seth at Abco. Give him a follow as well. And I see we have Doug here on stage. Doug, you have a comment, question?
Yeah, thank you. Given that we were talking about many goods such as apparel, like Courtney mentioned, they're predestined to people ordering a larger size, smaller size, like that. There's an inherent need for returning half or even 2/3 of the ordered goods. So the retail partners not wanting to accept returns or charging for the returns because of the associated refurbishing, repacking, restocking processes. I'd like to know your ideas. What is being done up front to make sure that the end consumer returns goods in a, let's say, ready to restock or resell condition? Right now you get a return label with a lot of Amazon shipments, but how can this be made logistically convenient for the warehousing processes so that we shouldn't encourage it necessarily, but recognizing that it's going to be done, especially with things like apparel. Let's reduce friction. I think, Evan, you said that term, reduce the friction in the process. Any ideas?
Yeah, what do you guys think, Evan, Austin, Courtney, whoever wants to chime in?
I think one of the ultimate like solutions here is, or let's start with the challenge. Today's returns are centralized, meaning that they always come back to the fulfillment center that they were shipped from, which can can be a bit of a challenge when you ship something from LA to Connecticut and somebody tries it on, they wear it out, and then they ship it back to LA. They return it only to be thrown into the trash. So I think if you can imagine a world where you have a kind of a decentralized network of returns processing centers, all across the country, where the ultimate goal is to understand the quality of the item as close to the point of return as possible, you cut out a lot of unnecessary miles in the shipment, or you're reducing CO2 emissions, and ultimately are issuing or not issuing a refund to a consumer faster, right? So I think that's kind of the end goal there. I think what I know some other companies are working on, it's like, hey, take pictures of the item before you send it back. I think that can be helpful, but I think ultimately being able to understand the quality of the good as close to the return point as possible, enables the fastest cycle time, reduces the most CO2 emissions, and in the end probably provides the best customer experience.
But is there something proactive that we end consumers can do to make the logistic process less frictional?
It's interesting. So we see a lot of returns on apparel, and normally what happens is someone's going to try something on, and if they got a larger and a smaller size, if that size doesn't fit, they're going to go with either the larger or the smaller size. They're generally not going to try on all three. So one item is going to come back basically ready to be returned directly into stock. So, I think just being understanding of that is good, but like trying to refold it perfectly and put it right back in the poly bag, like that's not gonna, it's not helpful to do that, because if the poly bag looks like it's been opened, it's not going to be, it's going to have to be kind of redone. But most items that are returned that are apparel, like, I would say maybe 10% are going to actually need to have like in-depth refurbishment. So it's not as much of an issue there. So I don't really know that there's anything a consumer can do. The point that was being made about like bringing it back to a closer source, I guess my question on that would be like, what happens after that item has been returned? Does it then get shipped from that location back out? So is there, like, if someone buys two items, is there a possibility that you have like a double shipment, or like, I still think that there's a lot on the, like, really bringing the returns and the forward logistics piece closer together is really important, because you can save emissions in one place, but then you end up possibly picking them back up in another place. So it's, but I think that's also why it's really good that we're on calls like this to try to work and figure some of these things out. But as far as like a person doing something to help with that returns process, I think the feedback's really important about like why something fit or didn't fit, but trying to refold it or, help it along that way is really probably not necessary at this point. They're really asking their brands to make sure that they're promoting as much of that feedback as possible. So even if something's not true to size, at least, if you have other people who have tried it on and have done some fit testing, then you can get an idea of like, okay, well, maybe a medium's not going to fit you, but maybe a large would, or maybe an extra large would. And you just need to kind of be aware up front to like size up a couple sizes, It's like, I think that whole like building your community and really helping and talking to your customers a lot is what a lot of brands are kind of focused on from that perspective.
Yeah, it's a good point, Courtney. I think like communicating that from the brand perspective on different sizing, or even like if you've built that community where people are chiming in and it's just kind of like known that it runs a little small, runs a little big, like I think is very helpful. And I think it's interesting too, kind of the poly bag situation that you messaged. I think for me, like when I'm returning something, one of the biggest challenges or frustration points is sometimes like that it came in a bag and I can't necessarily like tape that bag back up because you have to rip it to open it. So I would love to see like some kind of reusable packaging that you would be able to reseal and like send back, which I know is complicated from like a queue perspective and things like that. But that's definitely something on my side I would prefer to see. So Doug, thank you very much for that contribution. And I think Rich has a question or comment.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. But first of all, really great ideas. Enjoyed the dialogue. As Kevin knows, our team, we're a WMS software provider, so we work with a lot of our e-commerce customers, and we see a lot of returns coming in. And in trying to help our customers with these things, there's a level of sophistication around processes, workflows, even strategy to try and take on some of these challenges as team has been mentioning today. And I think some of these e-commerce retailers are going to figure it out. I mean, someone said, look, if you're going to charge someone $3 or $5 or $7 for a return, how is that going to impact conversion? Some of the retailers are going to say, well, I tell you what, I'll discount that for you because you're a customer of such standing, whatever it might be. The retailers are good at figuring that out. But the question to the panel, and again, just top of mind, of the folks you're working with, the e-commerce retailers, how many of them do you think are really sophisticated enough to do well on this journey? Because you got to understand the process and workflows, the technology and tools, the returns providers you might work with, even your overall strategy on this. And, my sense is it's going to be a struggle for some of these folks. I mean, are 30% of the people sophisticated enough to go through some of the things you're talking about? Is it 50, or are we still in the early stages? And, that's not going to happen for a while.
What do you guys think, Courtney and Austin? What are you seeing from the brands you guys work with?
That's a good question. I don't think I have like the ultimate answer. I guess I would say, like, just using our client base as a sample set, we have 2 or 3 that are both in the apparel industry that really, they have the highest percentage of returns and they really understand it. So from their business model, they kind of have to, and it's in their interest to really understand it, because them coming to us with that kind of level of knowledge makes it easier, better, and ultimately cheaper for them, of them giving us, hey, here's the extra tags that when they have the tag off, you put it on. If an item is overly damaged, which means XYZ, then that's going to be in the discard pile. So it's ultimately in their best interest from a bottom line. Ones that don't have this like kind of sophistication, it's maybe fine for their business or like kind of their loss. So I think ultimately with us, like the more kind of knowledge and process a brand comes to us, they most likely are getting their kind of return process at a more efficient cost. So they can reduce their cost, because we're going to them and saying, hey, you want us to do X? Well, that'll cost this much. You don't want us to do that. We want to go this way. Then they know how much they're paying for, as opposed to if they're coming to us being like, oh, yeah, it's a returns. I want you to fix it and send it back. Well, then you get a bill for us spending an extra 20 hours on your returns. Well, you said, hey, fix it and make it better. And we did, but not having that clarity. So yeah, I think that's ultimately where it comes to us. I mean, we try to be transparent at the end of the day, but yeah, if brands don't really want that or have that level of insight, I think it's the pain kind of felt on both sides. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Austin. Courtney?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with what Austin said. I think too, so like just from what we've seen, so like I was on the phone yesterday, or on a Zoom call yesterday with a brand, teeny tiny brand, but she said that, like she's had 1% of her orders have come back because and it was an underwear for people who are athletes. And she said, like 1% of the units came back because of a failure in the elastic at the waistband. And so I think when it's a material defect, it's obvious that there's an issue, because you start seeing you see a lot of red flags come up with that product. And the same thing too, if you have something that was just manufactured incorrectly from a fit perspective, you're going to kind of, you'll see signs of that. You'll see trends that are pretty straightforward with that. And I think that's like for us, the brands that we work with, even the large brands, that's kind of where they really have that insight. And then when it comes to, just more generalized, like if a brand brands are known to have like a lot of SKUs. And so like, let's say that you have 20% overall return rate on all of these SKUs, but you see like this one particular style or this one particular color has like a much higher return rate, then you can kind of look at that and say, okay, something's going on here. But it's not in my system to be able to like point them to that data. It's more because like say I see the style, I see a description, and I see a SKU. So I'm not sure if 2 Boxes actually has a solve for that to be able to provide that more of that data back in a more rolled up form to the brands. But I just know like brands in general, if they start seeing a particular product come back, it's going to be pretty obvious that it's going to come back. So the more sophisticated like slicing and dicing of the mini SKUs and the, a regular return rate on those mini SKUs, I honestly don't know how they do any of that. I don't have visibility for that.
Interesting. So Evan I think Courtney kind of teed you up there a little bit. As 2 Boxes have that kind of visibility?
Yeah, so I'll start with Courtney's. So we have the visibility down to the SKU level for what's coming back, and can you do it at a SKU level or a group or a product. Generally the SOPs are at a product type level, so that's the level that we would be collecting the information. So tops or bottoms or accessories or footwear, but it can be more specific if a brand or merchant wants that. And then I think to Rich's question, I think it all depends on the size of the merchant, right? So the brands that are doing, probably less than 5 million a year in ARR, they're probably, aware of the returns problem, whether they're educating themselves on it and like looking for solutions. And that might not be the first thing in their mind, but as they grow, it almost always becomes something that's top of mind when you have a 20 to sometimes, especially in the apparel industry, 40% return rate. Also, when money is cheap and you can get great deals for inventory loans, like you don't care as much about returns probably. But when money's tight and lending is expensive, then you're looking everywhere to see how much inventory you can get back into stock. And I think what I would love to see from the industry, and especially within the brands, is just like there's no chief return officer, or the returns generally fall into hey, this is becoming a problem, somebody should take a look at it, and kind of just gets picked up kind of ad hoc within there. And I think with I would love to see a returns officer or VP of returns or something like that kind of pop up in the industry, especially on the on the brand side over time, and really have a kind of commitment to figuring out those issues. I think that would be a cool thing to see.
All right, so we got returns, credit score, and a chief returns officer in the future. A lot of predictions here from Evan. I love that. So Rich, thanks for that question. Definitely, that's Rich from Stamp Fulfill and Safe Travels there. All right, so definitely great discussion today with everybody. Thank you to Courtney, Evan, and Austin. Evan, if people that are listening want to find out more about 2 Boxes, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so they can go to 2boxes.com. We have a contact form there. Otherwise, they can, reach out to myself or my co-founder, our head of sales. So I'm Evan at 2boxes.com. My co-founder and our CEO, Kyle at 2boxes.com. And if you're already convinced and just want to talk about a sale, you can reach out to Ben, and he's our head of sales, and his email is just ben at 2boxes.com.
All right, awesome. And Courtney, if people want to get in touch with Renewal Logistics, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so you can go to renewallogistics.com, and we have a really good contact form, which can get you to the right person. And my email is cfolk@renewallogistics.com. And we've got, a team of salespeople that can help if anyone has a specific request. And yeah, so that's what I would say is probably the best move.
All right, great. And how about Austin? How can we find out more about Atomix?
Thanks, Kevin. It's Austin at Atomix logistics.com, or go to our website, atomixlogistics.com, or just send me a DM. I'm happy to answer wherever.
All right. So thank you, Courtney, Austin, and Evan, for joining me today. And thank you again to 2Box for sponsoring this discussion. And thanks to everybody that has hung out with us I see some of you have been here the whole time, which is over an hour. So I really appreciate that and the contributions there. We're going to be doing these live audio events on a almost weekly basis, I will say. So we're going to be planning on doing these every Tuesday. So be sure to be on the lookout here on LinkedIn. And thanks for everyone for joining. Have a good day. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the new warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the new warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.